Let's talk about seaplanes. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. Today's topic is seaplanes. That is airplanes that can take off and land on water. What a concept. Seaplanes are an interesting topic because they embody competing allegiances. That is, you want something that will float on the water, like a boat, but you want something that will fly through the air, like an airplane, but you want them to do both. Now, the characteristics of boats is they tend to be kind of heavy, and they tend to be kind of slow. Some can be fast, but many boats are relatively slow. They have a lot of drag because the water drags on the hull of the boat, so there's a lot of drag. And this is in stark contrast to airplanes. Airplanes tend to be very light, they tend to be very fast, and most of them have relatively little drag. So when you combine your wish for something that can ply the surface of the water with something that can fly well through the air, you have competing allegiances. You have conflicts in the design. And this has plagued seaplanes forever. The other problem with seaplanes is the transition from one mode to the other. If you have a seaplane, it's on the surface of the water, and it needs to do that, but then it needs to transition from being a watercraft into being a flying airplane. It is the transition from one mode of movement to the other mode of movement that makes seaplanes challenging and dangerous. There are basically three ways to look at seaplanes. Is it a pure seaplane, or is it amphibious? That is, can it land on the water or the land? A lot of seaplanes are amphibious. The other design characteristic of seaplanes that's interesting is whether the airplane hull is the flotation, that is it a flying boat, or is it a regular airplane mounted on pontoons? Both designs have their advantages and their disadvantages. My first introduction to seaplanes was when I was a kid. I was about 12 years old, and our family was vacationing in Canada. We were on a very long rock-shored lake in Ontario, and the purpose of that trip was relaxation, exploration, and fishing. We were typically there for 2 weeks on end, staying in a lodge, eating our meals with other families in a large dining area. It was super fun for the kids. One day when we were at the lodge, we heard a sound outside, and when we investigated, it was an airplane landing on the water of the lake in front of the lodge. The pilot landed the airplane and then taxied it on the water to the dock and tied up at the dock in front of the lodge. When the pilot came in, he was introduced to the visitors at the lodge, and he announced that he was prepared to offer, for a fee, he was prepared to offer airplane rides in his seaplane. Well, my dad thought this was just fabulous. So most of the family, not everyone, but most of the family got an airplane ride in the seaplane. Now, this little airplane was a Piper Cub. It was bright yellow, and it was on floats, that is, pontoons. It had 2 seats. The pilot sat in the back, and the passenger sat in the front. When it was my turn to ride in the seaplane, I was buckled into my seat, given some simple instructions, and off we went. The pilot explained that he was going to accelerate and it was going to get very noisy, and he said that he would get it up on the step. He specifically said, we're going to get it up on the step. That is, he was going to bring the hull of each pontoon up onto the surface of the water and get it planing. He explained to me as a 12-year-old that this dramatically decreased the drag and allowed the airplane to further accelerate and then take off. He did exactly that. We took off, we flew around the lake a couple of times. We came by and looked at the lodge where we were staying and the island in front of it. It was marvelous, and then soon it was time to come in and land, and he did just that. The landing was fun because as he touched down, it got very shaky. There was a lot of vibration as the airplane changed from being a flying airplane into being a strange watercraft. He taxied us up to the dock and let me out. So that was my first experience in a seaplane. Fascinating. Many years later, I had already earned my pilot's license, and we had a family airplane. Now, this was not some luxury. This was a business investment, because when I bought the airplane, the plan was to rent it out to other pilots working with the flight school so that people would have an airplane that was well maintained and easy to fly so that they could earn their pilot's credentials, get some practice, but they had to pay for that privilege. So the airplane actually paid for itself. A number of years ago, my daughter and I discussed the idea of getting our seaplane ratings. My daughter is a commercial pilot and a flight instructor, so she has credentials far in excess of what I have. We're both instrument rated. We decided to go to the Jack Brown Seaplane Base in Winter Haven, Florida, to get our seaplane rating. They had a program for pilots who were already credentialed as pilots to come and spend several days flying with them. At the end of the training, there's a check ride to prove that you had qualified, and then the credential would be entered into your record so that you would be a proper seaplane pilot. So we registered for that training, and the time came. Now, we needed to fly down to Florida to attend this training. We used the family airplane, and we took off and flew for many hours to get down to Florida, and we landed at the airport in Winter Haven with no issues. We did our training separately, but in parallel, if you will. They had Piper Cub aircraft on pontoons, and they had several of them. So she was able to train in one aircraft with one flight instructor, while I was training in another aircraft with another flight instructor. So our training progressed in parallel. There were didactic sessions, lectures that explained the principles of safely flying and managing a seaplane. Then there was a lot of practice where we flew with the flight instructor and did maneuvers so that we could be certain that we could control this aircraft in all its different modes of flight. We learned how to safely take off. We learned how to judge the direction of the wind based on what we saw on the surface of the water. We learned strategies on how to set up a landing so that we could land safely. We learned to gently bring the airplane down and touch the pontoons to the water in a controlled way so that we don't flip the airplane over. At the end of our training, we each took our check rides and passed. So my credential became private pilot, single engine, land and sea, instruments. Now you would think that our adventure is now over. We went to Florida for the purpose of getting our seaplane ratings. We put in our time, we worked hard to understand and develop skills, and then we succeeded. We got our seaplane ratings. Perfect. But we still had to get home. So when it was time to depart in the morning, I called for the weather, got a proper weather report, and it was going to be fine to fly home. There was no terrible weather. We took off. The weather in Winter Haven was blue skies, puffy clouds, no issues. Frequently when you have a landmass that is surrounded by water, like the peninsula of Florida, weather can be an issue because you've got the cool water and the warm land, or you've got warm, moist air and cooler land. Things can happen because of the geography. And frequently at the top of Florida, there is a change in weather. It's not always terrible weather, but it's frequently different weather. We took off from Winter Haven, no issues, climbed to altitude, and we conducted the flight under the visual flight rules. That is, we didn't have an instrument clearance, didn't need it. We were talking to air traffic control en route. They were giving us radar service, telling us about traffic that might be an issue, giving us, a heads up on things that we might be encountering. As we got up toward northern Florida, the visibility dropped. Now, it didn't drop enough that it was illegal to fly under the visual flight rules, but two things happened. One, we could no longer see the ground underneath us because there was fog at the level of the ground. And the other thing is we could no longer see the horizon. The visibility around us was way more than 6 miles visibility, no question about it. But without the ability to see the horizon or the ground, the question arises, how do you keep the airplane right side up? Well, luckily we were well trained to deal with that. This was not an emergency. We were very safely flying, and we had a good weather report for our destination, and the weather there was fantastic. Our problem was just en route. We were both current on instruments. Okay, what do I mean by that? That is, we were recently updated on our instrument flying technique, and our skills were current. They were not rusty. We knew we didn't need to file an instrument flight plan because we took off in clear skies. We're going to land in clear skies, and we have plenty of visibility. There are no clouds that we need to worry about flying into, so there was really no problem. But we have to keep the airplane right side up. We have to maintain orientation. I was in the left seat, so by convention, I was pilot in command. This was funny because my daughter in the right seat had a lot more training and experience than I did. But I was pilot in command that day, and we discussed what we were up to. And I said, how about if I'm on the gauges and you are eyeballs out looking for traffic? She said, it's a plan. So this is the way we flew for more than an hour. I was looking at a cluster of 6 gauges so that I could keep the wings level keep our altitude correct so that I could avoid losing control of the airplane and tumbling out of the sky. That's a real possibility if you get spatial disorientation when flying, because you can't see the ground and you can't see the horizon. After perhaps an hour and a half, the horizon came back into view. The fog below us cleared. The weather became very easy to deal with, and we proceeded to our destination and landed with no issues. It was a lovely flight. It was an interesting way to cap off this trip, to have to identify a problem, figure out a solution, and then execute that plan so that we could safely complete our flight. So that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, you can put those in the comment section below, and I invite you to join us on future videos. See you soon.